Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single prince in possession of a vast fortune must be in want of a wife. Or so the ambitious mamas of the ton would have one believe. For the mothers of England's most eligible daughters, the arrival of Prince Quentin Oscar of Eldershire to London for the season was nothing short of divine providence. Our dear readers will forgive this humble chronicler of society's affairs for stating that the prince, or shall we call him Prince Q, as his intimates do, had become rather weary of the parade of eligible young ladies thrust before him like prized mares at Tattersall's. Not that one could blame the matchmaking mamas. A prince of 27 years, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes the precise shade of a summer storm, was a prize indeed. Wretched business, this, Prince Quentin muttered to his companion, Lord Huxley, as they escaped yet another ballroom filled with batting eyelashes and strategically displayed décolletage. If I see one more young lady who suddenly develops an interest in whatever obscure subject I mention, I shall retire to a monastery. They only wish to please your highness, replied Huxley, struggling to maintain a straight face. They wish to please my title and my coffers, the prince retorted. None of them gives a fig about me. Ah, poor Prince Q. How the hearts of our readers must ache for his plight. To be pursued for one's status rather than one's self is a burden few of us shall ever bear, though this chronicler suspects many would gladly volunteer for the position. Meanwhile, in a far less glamorous corner of London, Miss Felicity Pembrooke was experiencing a very different sort of evening altogether. The 19-year-old daughter of a country vicar who had passed away the previous winter, she had come to London to serve as companion to her elderly aunt, Lady Agatha Thornfield. A position that, while respectable, placed her firmly in the nebulous territory between servant and family, neither fish nor fowl, as the saying goes. Miss Pembroke, our dear Felicity, was a young woman of modest means but a modest intelligence. With hair the color of chestnuts and eyes that revealed every thought that crossed her mind, a terrible disadvantage in London society, I assure you. She possessed the sort of beauty that required a second glance to appreciate. Not the diamond of the season, perhaps, but a gem nonetheless. On this particular evening, while the cream of society twirled at Lady Hartley's ball, Felicity found herself in the kitchens of her aunt's townhouse, wrapping leftover food from dinner. Miss, you needn't trouble yourself, Mrs. Higgins, the cook, protested. That's servant's work. Felicity smiled. And yet my hands appear perfectly capable of it. Mrs. Higgins clucked her tongue, but said nothing more as Felicity bundled bread, cheese, and cold meat into a napkin. This had become her nightly ritual since discovering the Wilkins family living in the alley behind her aunt's garden. Mr. Wilkins had lost his position at the docks after an injury, and his wife and 3 children were slowly starving despite his best efforts. I'll return shortly, Felicity informed the butler, who merely nodded. The household staff had grown accustomed to Miss Pembroke's eccentricities, which included reading books on mathematics, sketching mechanical devices, and now, it seemed, feeding the neighborhood's unfortunate. Little did our heroine know that fate had arranged a most unexpected encounter for her that evening. For Prince Quentin, having escaped the ball, had decided to walk back to his London residence, dismissing his carriage and keeping only his most trusted bodyguard at a discreet distance. Your Highness, the guard protested, the streets are not safe at this hour. Nonsense, Davies, the prince replied. I spent 3 years in the Peninsula War. I dare say I can manage a London street. What he did not say was that he longed for the anonymity of darkness, for the freedom to be simply a man rather than a prince. The ton, with its artificial manners and calculated affections, had become suffocating. Now, dear readers, I must ask you to picture the scene. A narrow London street, gas lamps casting pools of golden light amid the shadows, and a young woman in a simple muslin dress kneeling beside a hollow-cheeked child, pressing food into his tiny hands. Slowly now, Tommy, our Felicity was saying. Your stomach isn't used to much. Small bites. The boy, no more than 5 years old, nodded solemnly before taking a careful bite of bread. His eyes, too large for his thin face, watched her with a mixture of gratitude and wariness that no child should know. Prince Quentin, rounding the corner, stopped short at the tableau before him. In the flicker of gaslight, with her profile illuminated and her hair escaping its pins, Felicity appeared to him like a painting come to life. A Caravaggio, perhaps, with its dramatic shadows and illuminated subjects. "There now," she said, her voice gentle. "Take the rest to your mother and sisters. Tell your father I've spoken to Mr. Jenkins at the bookshop, and he's willing to consider him for a position." "Thank you, miss," the boy whispered, clutching the bundle as if it were gold. "Off you go," she urged, and watched as he scampered away. She rose then, brushing crumbs from her skirt, and found herself face to face with a tall gentleman regarding her with an intensity that sent a flush to her cheeks. "I beg your pardon," she said, dipping into a curtsy out of instinct. Though his clothing was fine, in the dim light she did not recognize him as the prince whose image adorned countless broadsheets and gossip columns. "I didn't see you there." "No apology needed," replied the prince, his voice deeper than she expected. "It appears I've interrupted an act of kindness." Felicity, ever forthright, raised her chin. "Not kindness, sir. Justice. No child should go hungry while others throw away food that could feed them for a week." At this, the prince's eyebrows rose. Most young ladies of his acquaintance limited their conversation to the weather, musical accomplishments, or veiled compliments. This one spoke of justice and looked at him as if challenging him to disagree. "You are quite right," he said simply. She blinked, clearly expecting an argument. Well, yes, I am. And here, dear readers, is where our story might have ended. A brief encounter between two strangers in the night. Had not Tommy chosen that moment to reappear, running back toward Felicity with panic in his eyes. Miss, he cried. "It's Mum. The baby's coming early, and she's bleeding something awful." The blood drained from Felicity's face. "Where is the midwife?" "Dad went for her, but she's attending another birth across town." Without hesitation, Felicity turned to the prince. "Sir, I apologize, but I must go." To her surprise, he fell into step beside her. "I'll accompany you." "That's hardly necessary. I have some medical training from my military service," he interrupted. "And it appears time is of the essence." Felicity hesitated only a moment before nodding. This way, and thus began the strangest night of both their lives. The prince, who Felicity still believed to be merely a wealthy gentleman, found himself in a one-room dwelling barely large enough for the family it housed. Mrs. Wilkins lay on a thin pallet, her face gray with pain, while her daughters huddled fearfully in the corner. What followed were 3 hours of the most basic, primal human experience. Felicity, who had assisted the midwife in her village on occasion, directed the prince to heat water and tear sheets for bandages. Together, they helped Mrs. Wilkins bring a tiny girl into the world, a child so small that the prince could hold her entire body in his 2 hands. "She's bleeding too much," Felicity whispered to him, her eyes wide with fear. The prince, who had seen men die on battlefields, nodded grimly. "Keep the baby warm. I need clean cloths and any spirits they might have." Using techniques he'd learned from army surgeons, he worked to staunch the bleeding while Felicity cleaned and wrapped the infant, whispering prayers under her breath. By dawn, a miracle had occurred. Mrs. Wilkins slept, weak but stable, her newborn daughter at her breast. Mr. Wilkins had returned with the midwife, who had taken over their care, and Felicity found herself walking back to her aunt's house beside the mysterious gentleman who had proven himself so capable in a crisis. "You have my deepest gratitude," she said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Without your help, I fear we would have lost them both." The prince, his fine coat stained and his cravat long since abandoned, smiled faintly. "I should be thanking you. I haven't felt so useful in years." "Surely a gentleman like yourself has many important duties," Felicity remarked, curiosity getting the better of her. "Important, perhaps," he conceded, "but rarely meaningful." They had reached the back gate to Lady Thornfield's garden. Felicity hesitated, knowing that her absence would soon be discovered if it hadn't been already. "May I know the name of my companion in this night's adventures?" she asked. The prince, in a moment of rare impulse, decided to savor his anonymity for a bit longer. "Quentin," he replied, offering only his Christian name. "And yours?" "Felicity Pembrooke," she answered, dipping into a small curtsy. Though after tonight, I feel we've moved beyond such formalities. Indeed, he agreed, bowing in return. Miss Pembroke, might I call upon you? Perhaps in a more conventional manner next time. Felicity laughed, the sound bright in the early morning air. I would like that very much, Mr. Quentin. Though I warn you, my aunt keeps strict hours. Best to come after she's had her morning chocolate. With that, she slipped through the gate, leaving the prince standing in the street with the unfamiliar sensation of anticipation warming his chest. Oh, my dear readers, if only our Felicity had known to whom she had extended such a casual invitation. For the gossip sheets the very next day were filled with rumors of Prince Quentin's mysterious disappearance from Lady Hartley's ball, and speculation ran rampant about his whereabouts. The Tun, that magnificent beast with 1,000 eyes and twice as many tongues, buzzed with theories ranging from a secret assignation with a married countess to a high-stakes card game in a gentleman's club. None, you may be assured, came close to the truth. When the prince's carriage arrived at Lady Thornfield's modest townhouse the following afternoon, the household was thrown into chaos. His Royal Highness, Prince Quentin Oscar of Eldershire, announced the flustered butler to the nearly empty drawing room, where Lady Thornfield promptly dropped her teacup. Your Highness, she exclaimed, struggling to rise from her chair. We are most honored, most extraordinarily honored. Please, Lady Thornfield, remain seated, the prince said graciously. I apologize for calling without proper notice. I've come to speak with your niece, Miss Pembroke. Felicity, who had been reading in the window alcove, now stood frozen, her book slipping from nerveless fingers to thud against the floor. She began, then stopped, mortification washing over her as she recalled how she had spoken to him the previous night. How she had ordered him about, sent him for water, handed him bloodied cloths. The prince's eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had remained steady throughout the night's ordeal, now crinkled with amusement. Yes, Miss Pembroke. It seems I neglected to provide my full introduction. Lady Thornfield looked between them in bewilderment. Felicity, you are acquainted with His Highness. Before Felicity could stammer an explanation, the prince smoothly intervened. Your niece and I met through a mutual interest in charitable works. I was most impressed with her compassion for those less fortunate. Charitable works? Echoed Lady Thornfield faintly. Felicity, gathering her wits, executed a perfect curtsy. Your Highness honors our home. Might I offer you tea? And thus began the courtship that set the Tun ablaze with speculation. For Prince Quentin, against all expectations and the careful plans of his advisors, began to call regularly at the Thornfield residence. He invited Felicity and her aunt to musicales, to the theater, and even to small dinner parties at his London residence. Society matrons watched in horror as their carefully groomed daughters were overlooked in favor of a country vicar's daughter with no fortune, no connections, and, most shockingly, no apparent effort to secure the prince's affections. For Felicity, true to her nature, spoke to him with the same directness she had shown that first night. I don't understand, she confessed during a turnabout the garden at a garden party, safely within sight of chaperones but beyond their hearing. Why continue this acquaintance? Surely you have more suitable companions. The prince, resplendent in his formal attire, yet somehow more at ease than she had ever seen him in society, smiled. More suitable by whose measure? The Tun's. By everyone's, she insisted. I'm nobody, Your Highness. Quentin, he corrected. And you are very much somebody, Felicity Pembroke. You are the woman who feeds hungry children from her own table, who risks her reputation to deliver babies in the slums, and who speaks to princes as if they were ordinary men. Do you know how rare that is? Felicity blushed, the pink in her cheeks making her eyes seem even more luminous. I spoke to you that way because I didn't know you were a prince. Precisely, he said softly. And now that you do know, you're trying to put distance between us. Please don't. Oh, how the hearts of our dear readers must flutter at such a scene. For what is more romantic than a prince who wishes to be seen for himself rather than his title? And what is more charming than a young woman who values character above rank? Yet the course of true love never did run smooth, as a certain bard once noted. For as the season progressed and Prince Quentin's attention to Felicity became impossible to ignore, the whispers turned venomous. Fortune hunter, some called her. She must have entrapped him somehow, others insisted. A nobody from nowhere, sniffed the Countess of Wellesley, whose own daughter had been considered a prime candidate for the prince's attention. These barbs might have been easier to bear had Felicity not begun to wonder if they contained a kernel of truth. Not about her intentions, she knew her own heart, but about her suitability. What did she know of court life, of diplomatic responsibilities, of the weight of a crown? "You've been avoiding me," the prince said when he finally cornered her at Lady Windermere's ball, after she had pleaded headaches to avoid 2 of his invitations. "I've been busy," she demurred, not meeting his eyes. Felicity, just her name, but spoken with such feeling that she couldn't help but look up. "Tell me what troubles you." Around them, the ballroom whirled with color and light, the orchestra playing a waltz that seemed to echo the tumult in her heart. They stood in an alcove, nominally chaperoned by her aunt, who had developed a convenient interest in the refreshment table several yards away. "I am not what you need," she said at last, her voice barely audible above the music. "You need someone who understands your world, who can help you in your duties, not someone who causes scandalized whispers wherever she goes." The prince's jaw tightened. "Who has been unkind to you?" "It doesn't matter," she insisted. "They're right. I don't belong in your world." "Then perhaps it is my world that needs to change," he replied, his voice low and intense. "Because the night we met, when you were feeding that child and then helping to bring a new life into the world, I saw more nobility in your actions than in all the grand ballrooms of Europe." Felicity's breath caught. "You can't mean that." "I have never meant anything more," he said. And then, to the shock of several nearby dowagers who were pretending not to eavesdrop, he took her hand in his. "Felicity Pembrooke, you showed me what truly matters. Not titles or wealth or power, but compassion. Courage. Doing what is right even when it's difficult." "Quentin," she whispered, forgetting his title entirely. "I love you," he said simply. "I believe I began to love you the moment I saw you kneeling beside that hungry child, and my feelings have only grown stronger with each day. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you, a life where we can use our position to help others as you've always done." And there, dear readers, in the middle of Lady Windermere's ballroom, with the ton watching in slack-jawed astonishment, Prince Quentin Oscar of Eldershire dropped to one knee before Miss Felicity Pembrooke. "Will you marry me?" he asked, his voice carrying just far enough to ensure that by morning, every gossip sheet in London would have the story. Felicity, her eyes shining with unshed tears, looked down at the man before her. Not the prince, but the man who had helped deliver a baby in the slums, who looked at her as if she were the rarest of treasures, who wanted to change his world rather than ask her to change for it. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of gasps, whispers, and exclamations. Lady Thornfield nearly fainted. The orchestra, unsure how to proceed, faltered briefly before the conductor recovered and signaled for them to continue playing. And our dear prince, caring nothing for protocol or propriety in that moment, rose to his feet and kissed his betrothed right there before all of society. The wedding, held 3 months later in Westminster Abbey, was the event of the decade. Felicity, radiant in a gown of ivory silk with seed pearls sewn into the bodice, walked down the aisle not as a nobody from nowhere, but as the woman who had captured a prince's heart through the simple act of feeding a hungry child. And in a touching tribute to their first meeting, the royal couple established a foundation to combat childhood hunger throughout the kingdom, ensuring that their own children, when they arrived, would grow up understanding that true nobility comes not from birth but from action. So, my dear readers, as we conclude our tale, let us remember that love often finds us when we least expect it, in the most unlikely of circumstances. And sometimes, it takes but a single gesture of kindness to change everything.